brought to you by... Welcome to Absolute Beginner Machine Embroidery. I'm your host, Sara, and in this episode, we are talking about embroidery designs that have an embossing effect. Very cool designs to work with. And here I've got on the pocket of this hoodie an embossed design. And what I mean by that is the machine is going to stitch a certain way so that in the negative space, it's going to kind of flatten out your background fabric, and that allows the positive space or the main portion of your design to really stand out. Now you can use a topper, that's what I'm going to show you when I stitch this out, to really flatten out that background, or you may choose, like on this hoodie, not to use a topper because that allows some of those little fibers to kind of peek out between your threads. You're also going to want to think about what type of fiber you are working with. We've embossed on a lighter loft terry cloth here, and then also on this little fleece hat. And both of those don't have a really thick pile to them. If you were doing an embossed design on a really thick terry cloth towel, maybe a bath towel, you're probably going to find that you do really need to use a topper just because it may not completely flatten out all of those fibers. So when you're choosing your design and thinking about how to stabilize it, we really need to take into consideration the type of fabric that we're working with. Now on these, I've used a variegated thread, and that's what I'm going to stitch out as well. These are all single color designs. So to build a little bit of depth and dimension, it's a lot of fun to use variegated threads. This is a particular thread from Madeira that looks a little bit striped on the spool, and it gives you a really neat variegated effect in the finished project. So let's take these projects right out of the way and talk about how we can layer a few things in our hoop to be ready to stitch. We are going to replicate how I stitched this design onto the hat band. So what I have here is a piece of fabric that represents the hat band. This is based on the pattern piece. And I know that this is going to be folded in half when I place it on the hat. So I'm going to fold it in half now. Just fold it right over itself and match up those long raw edges. And now think about where you want your design centered on the hat band. I don't really want it center front on the head, maybe off center just a little bit. So now I'm going to divide this into thirds very easily. So we'll just fold it into thirds, just like that, pretty close. And I'm just gonna give this a good firm finger press on the side here. And now with my marking pen, I'm gonna give myself a centering line. If you're working with a thinner fabric, you can see it just a little bit better, but we're just kind of eyeballing, and that's totally fine. It's kind of a free form mark. There we go. And now we'll give ourselves another marking line. You could measure up a little bit to account for the 1/2 inch seam allowance that you're going to be losing, and then measure between the top and the bottom and just give yourself a center line. And again, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. If I were working on a really particular project, I would definitely measure that. Because this is a hat that's going to be kind of bending around the body, I'm going to eyeball it because I'm not super worried. I think it's going to look just fine the way that it is. So now I know exactly how I want to hoop my fabric in the hoop. Now this fabric is fairly thick, so hooping it is going to be a bit of a challenge. So instead of hooping the fabric, we are going to start by hooping stabilizer. Here I've hooped a piece of wash away stabilizer. It's got a lot of support to it, and then after I have stitched my project and washed the hat, it's going to completely dissolve and wash away. It's also very soft and flexible, so if you do wear the hat before you wash it, it's not going to make a stiff portion on that hat band where the embroidery design is, because it's got a lot of flexibility to it. So it's a great product to work with. Now we want to be able to adhere our band fabric to the stabilizer. For that, I'm going to use a little bit of a spray adhesive. That just allows me to position my fabric and let it stick right in place so that I don't have to worry about it shifting as the machine embroiders. Now when I spray my spray adhesive on the hoop, I like to make sure that I turn away from the machine and try not to get any of the spray adhesive around the edges of your hoop, just right in the very center. Because if you do get any spray adhesive on the hoop itself, everything's going to stick to it. You'll find that it gets linty. You can clean it off, but it's a little bit of a challenge. So just be careful when you are spraying and get it right in the very center. So we'll scoot away a little bit. Really don't want to have sticky all over my sewing machine either. There we go. Now I can position my fabric on the hoop. Now if I put it in this way so that it's in the direction that I've marked, all of this excess fabric is going to be in the throat of the machine. So I'm just going to rotate my fabric around, and then I'm just going to rotate the design on my embroidery screen. No big deal there. Now I'm going to fold right on my marked line, just like this, and then position that fold right in line with the horizontal center point markings on my hoop, and then fold it open And that's going to get my design nice and straight in the hoop. One of my favorite little tricks to use, just to kind of fold back, position your fold with your markings, and then open it up and push down on that sticky spray adhesive. And now it's exactly where I need it. On this particular design, I'm also going to add a topper so that I can make sure that all of my stitches are really flat beneath that stitching, because that's the goal of the embossed design. And like I said earlier, if you were working with a really lofty towel, you would need this topper layer too. Once again, I'm going to use my spray adhesive, turn away from the machine a little bit, and spray right on my mark. And now I can take my piece of topper and just push it down onto the fabrics. Now we're ready to take this to the machine, attach it to the hoop, and then we've got to rotate that design. Now this design looks a little bit square on screen, but there is a rosebud that needs to be facing up, and right now it's facing down. So we're going to rotate our design 180 degrees so it'll stitch in the right way for my hat, and then just for giggles we'll mirror image it too. That'll flip the flower over. Now I am ready to stitch my design. The center portion of our rose design is complete, and I pulled it off of the machine just to show you how beautiful this looks. So you can really see, especially with the topper on there, how the petals of our rose are really coming out from the background, and the embossing design is really compressing the backgrounds of the flower. So it's a really, really nice technique. I'm going to finish stitching this, and then I can complete the rest of the hat, and I've got a really nice little cute hat to wear. I hope that you've enjoyed learning about embossing designs. Like I said before, make sure that you think a little bit about the type of fabric that you're working with before you choose which stabilizers to use, and then I'm sure you will have a beautifully embossed design as well. Thanks so much for watching. Absolute Beginner Machine Embroidery is brought to you by Baby Lock, Embroidery Library, Madeira, and Urban Threads.